Asia is entering a new phase of AI adoption, defined not by demos, pilot programs, or hype, but by real deployment across some of the region's most complex and high-velocity businesses. Enterprises are not asking whether they should adopt AI. They're asking how fast and at what cost. From gaming engines that run at millisecond latency to financial institutions navigating fraud, risk, and compliance, the region is shifting firmly into execution mode. Yet this acceleration brings some new challenges. Rising compute demand, expanding attack surfaces, rising energy issues, and sometimes divergent regulatory issues as well. This episode of a Global Tech Podcast is really curious about what has shifted in the last 18 months that is moving Asian enterprises from AI experimentation to deployment. How are business and technology leaders balancing innovation with real-world pressures of compute cost, cybersecurity changes, and talent scarcity? As AI usage continues to scale, how are companies adapting to the new economics of intelligence? AGTP is joined by Parimal Pandya, SVP and Managing Director, Asia Pacific at Akamai Technologies, to break all of this down for us. Parimal, thank you so much for coming to the show today. Good morning. How are you doing today?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And good morning, good evening to you as well. I'm doing great. It's a nice Monday morning in Hong Kong, and what better way to start than have this conversation with you?
Thank you so much. Okay, let's just jump right into this. I mentioned this in the intro, but Asia's AI adoption is accelerating. What do you think has fundamentally changed in the last 12 to 18 months that pushed enterprises from experimentation to implementation?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I must applaud you. I think your summary was spot on.
I
And
tried.
hopefully, hopefully I can do justice in terms of being able to break down into each of those issues. But I've been involved in the region for a long time, and I try to do sort of I travel all the time, but every spring and fall I try to do a little visit across the region, and I've been doing that for a while. And every time I do that, there are a bunch of themes that emerge. And there's been a constant sort of theme, obviously, around AI and what to do with it that's been top of mind for CIOs, CISOs for the last couple of years, since pretty much sort of late 22. However, the tone and tenor of the questions that are coming and the direction where it's headed has changed pretty much every year. And frankly, with every trip, so every 6 months, you would say, every season, there's a different flavor of it. In the beginning, there was just this question about what is it and what can it do and what will it do to us. And I don't think there was any sense of clarity or even direction. Then I think when last year I used to travel across the region, I used to hear a lot about, we have an AI strategy and it's called AI everywhere or everything AI or pick your favorite phrase, right? And it was truly reflective of sort of what was going on. Everybody knew that it was a technology to reckon with, to embrace, to adopt, yet also be mindful of the implications it could have. But there wasn't a very clear thought process around how to go about it. This year, though, and especially in these last few months, there's been a very, very sort of marked shift in that tone. I think we've gone from sort of some of the last couple of trips that I talked about, the questions that I was getting, to a very deliberate, very proactive, very intentional approach about, yes, we know what the technology can do. We understand where we want to apply it in our processes, in our operations, perhaps to create better feature functionality for our customers, perhaps to make ourselves more efficient. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways in which people are thinking about that is more deliberate, more directional, more specific than perhaps ever before. And it's a leap beyond. We have a chatbot that we want to use for some simple purposes, and I think that's really been the big shift, if I may, in these last few years.
And do you see different responses across different sectors? Do you know what I mean? Like gaming is one thing, financial services is another thing, but healthcare is like completely different. And I don't know, you've inspired like a bunch of different questions to me. I'll try to keep it short, but like I am thinking like if you look at a particular sector, is it more ops and processes, more customer facing, depending on the sector, or is it just a mishmash of all across all of these sectors? Maybe you could comment on that a little bit too.
That's a great question. I think. So let me start at the top. There are three ways in which folks are trying to figure out how to take advantage of the technology. First is how can they use it to improve their internal processes, their operations, if you will, right? Um, And it could be more sort of function specific, but that's sort of the general question. Then the second is how can they use it to improve the specific operations of the business that they're in? Now, could be whatever. It could be I'm a train operator, I'm a healthcare provider, I'm a retail operator. I mean, it could be anything, right? How can I make my existing business operations or processes better, thereby giving more efficiency? Or how can I leverage it to improve the pace of innovation and come up with new feature functionality capabilities to provide to my consumers? Which is the third part, which is how can I provide new ways in which my consumers can interact with me or I can interact with them? And the degree to which they lean into each one of them will depend upon what specific business they're in.
What do you have a business focus or a vertical focus where you talk to people more in this one particular vertical than you do in others, or is it spread across all of those places that I've mentioned? Do you know what I mean? And I'm curious how it's different.
Maybe I can go rattle off some examples by industry, if you will, kind of make it more specific, right? So we're lucky. We speak with folks across different verticals, industry verticals. Whether it be gaming, social media, media, OTT, to retail, e-commerce, hotel, travel, to healthcare, enterprise, financial services. So it really cuts the gamut. And I'll try to give you a few examples. So gaming, for example, right? We were just speaking with a large gaming company in Korea, and they're trying to figure out how can they use generative AI in their character development process. So think about it, right? You're a game studio, and you have the creative folks that are trying to come up with ideas about what kind of characters to develop, and they have to communicate it with the design folks. Right now, today it's a very cumbersome verbal communication. How I'm trying to express my idea to you visually or verbally. Now they just explained to me how they're using these generative AI tools to actually use prompts to create some sort of a starting point for a conversation so that the character development process can accelerate. Right. And I heard that across a couple of different folks that I spoke with. Now, there is, however, this interesting thing about how their users are very sensitive to the fact that whether the character was developed by a generative AI agent or a tool or a human being. And it's really interesting how they want to use the technology. Yes, there's this consciousness about, whose creative process was it?
So you're saying that, like, in the old days, before they had this generative AI capability, that, like, I'm a designer and I'm thinking I want to tell the character design people exactly what I want, but I'm not so good at, like, verbalizing that maybe. So every time I tell them, they build a character or design a character that's not exactly what I wanted. So before I do that now, you're saying that they're like, oh, I can use the generative AI tools to get close enough to the character that I want by iterating in like Mid-Journey or some such thing. And then I give it to them and go, this is pretty close to what I want. But that there's some consternation around who's now really creating the character, which in and of itself is kind of like an interesting dynamic, no? So I just thought that was
That's
super
exactly
interesting.
right.
Yeah.
But the interesting twist there is it's not the entirety of the character is not generated by the tool. Like the final product, you could argue, is still what a human being perhaps might have developed, and maybe that's a consolation. But that's also, I think, indicative of how businesses, at least the ones that I speak in Asia, are trying to use these technologies as a way to speed up existing processes and a sort of a assistant to the individuals that are doing those jobs, thereby making them more efficient and effective in ways we just talked about. That's just one example, right? The other one is, in the OTT business, right? I mean, you have so much content right now, and they're trying to always figure out, who to position what and how, right? You like certain kinds of content. They know what you prefer, and they're trying to position those kinds of that kind of content to you. But the how is the question now. And by the way, that question comes in a lot of consumer facing businesses, and so they're trying to figure out, okay, how to use these tools to recommend better quality, smarter recommendations to you. So obviously you consume more content, but now they're also using these tools to analyze videos and to create little snippets, little trailers that might tease you in based on your preferences. So there's a lot of sort of on-the-fly generation of little teasers, trailers, you may want to call it, that's being created, that's being done to get the user excited about the content and therefore drive consumption. And I see that across several different industries. In fact, a closely related example, if I may, is in retail, e-commerce. right? So we heard a fascinating story from one of the largest e-commerce players in India, and what they want to do is, say you want to buy a shirt. Now today you're going to go search and look for certain styles and whatnot. But if you like a style, they want you to be able to feel how you're going to look in that attire in different situations,
Okay.
right? So, say for example, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of weddings in India, and they want to sell some stuff for a wedding. Yeah, I might wanna see how I'm going to look in the attire in a specific type of event, and so that requires generating a lot of video or image on the fly, by way of inferencing, and presenting it to me so that I can get a sense of how I'm going to look and feel, and therefore again improve conversion, or expand the basket size. So those are the kind of examples where I think, whether it be for video or commerce, or it could be any other consumer instance, you might see generative AI helping create exciting interfaces for the consumer to kind of get them to lean in and buy more of the good stuff.
I feel like I love this now. I love these examples. And I'm just thinking as you're talking about this, right? And I think we talked about this during the prep call. I can feel in your voice this excitement around, like, I get to talk to some of the most interesting people, and I get to hear some of the most interesting stories. And I feel like what you do is frankly not that different than what I do. It's just that I record it all the time. No, because these anecdotes are so cool, right? Because again, like you said, just an Indian wedding is a thing in and of itself, right? And
Yeah.
the idea of getting a sense of what am I going to look like in this thing that I want to buy and wear to it. Like, I know what the wedding's going to be like, but what am I going to be like when I'm there? Is kind of an interesting way for AI to be used in a way that I hadn't considered. But you get to hear that story. You know what I mean?
I didn't think about it either, but so those are more sort of the consumer facing examples that I just talked to you about. Well, let's shift gears. Talk about the healthcare. I think that's really where there's a lot of interesting adoption ways in which technology is being adopted. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard of like use cases in radiology, pathology. I mean, think about it. Like, in healthcare, a lot of what takes place is research, or you get data, you have to analyze it, you have to make judgment calls, you have to make decisions, you have to take action, right? And a lot of that work is really where I think some of these modern technologies shine. And you do see, we're seeing a lot of interesting companies come up that are trying to do focus on specialties like radiology, pathology, and other examples that I just talked about, even neurology. I heard a really interesting story the other day about how they're using it in emergency care in Korea, where they've equipped the ambulances with cameras and different ways to capture information from the ambulance, no sooner the patients in the ambulance, feed it back to the hospital. And they're making all these doing all this analysis to then determine which physician to bring on call, so that they can cut down the time it takes for the physician show up once the patient's already there. Now, some of it is being done already before. I think I remember reading some research that came way back, but now this kind of takes it to the next level. Or how they're using cameras across the hospitals to determine where there might be empty beds, where there are too many patients, where there are empty wheelchairs, so they can appropriately allocate assets within the hospital. So, and of course, the use cases around drug discovery, genetic research, things like that are well known. And I think that gets me excited, because it can really accelerate the pace of innovation while bringing down the cost, hopefully. So those are some interesting use cases in healthcare. Financial services is another interesting one. Um, I think the banks, obviously financial services is one catch-all term. There's different kinds of services or companies in that space. But, I was recently talking to somebody, and they do sort of, credit risk analysis, and or somebody who works in private wealth management, and they talked about how they were using these tools to either create reports for the clients that they were going to engage with, or better analyze the data to make more informed decisions about credit risk or insurance risk, for that matter. In fact, we spoke with an insurer the other day. And then, of course, there's we want to use it for an internal chatbot for employees to get answers to questions and things like that. So, there are a lot of these interesting examples in that vertical. Um, the other fascinating vertical is heavy industry. You have like all these robotics uh, related cases that are coming up in Japan and Korea, where they want to figure out how to use these technologies to better manage the robots. And whether they be in manufacturing or they may be now increasingly, you see these robots bringing you coffee across different office buildings and such. In fact, that was a real example I saw recently when they said, "Oh, we have two buildings," and they use these robots to bring you coffee. And obviously, they want to use it to better manage those assets. But yeah, I mean, I think the use cases are just fascinating, and I feel like every day there's an interesting real business operational use case that comes up where businesses are trying to make themselves more efficient.
Do you think that there's a difference between what's going on with your peers in Asia when you're traveling around, right? Every 6 months, you say, with spring and the fall, you travel around and you try to get like a handle on what's going on. But at some level, you work for a global company, right? There must be other people doing similar things in your role in the United States and in Europe who are hearing maybe some similar but divergent stories. Is Asia doing anything that's unique and different? Is it developing at a different pace? And are there reasons why, do you think, if that is the case or not? Do you know what I mean? Because you must hear stories from the
Yeah,
States and
I
from
mean,
Europe, yeah?
yeah. No, first of all, I think there is sort of a broader sense of awareness and adoption and interest around the kinds of things that I'm talking about, and I think it is global now. So let me just kind of state that as a baseline statement, right? Uh, I think, having said that, it just so happens that the countries that I deal with in Asia, there's just like a long history of research, innovation. There's deep tech talent. There are industries or businesses that have sort of the assets that can benefit from these capabilities or technologies. I just talked about robotics and things like that. Um, and yeah, I think it really just comes down to the talent and the assets and the resources you have. And I think a lot of these folks are also the ones who would be the first to jump on a new innovation or technology, and these are the ones definitely who are diving in, head first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember the name of this Japanese company that has a factory of robots that builds robots like just below Mount Fuji. Just the name of it has escaped me, but the Japanese have been building robots for probably 2 or 3 generations now. And I'd love to see some of the things that they're doing with artificial intelligence, not just in the design of the robots, but in the way they implement their usage as well. Because delivering coffee is a great thing, but just more from an optimization standpoint, right? If you think about even just Toyota's just-in-time management system, right? How they can apply that to like their suppliers and stuff should be super cool. Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the coffee example was just a lighter
No,
one,
no, no, I know, I know, I
but
know.
you're right. There is, especially in some of these countries around Northern Asia, you're going to see a lot of really interesting cases where they're going to leverage artificial intelligence to then better manage or optimize the use of robots and robotics in general.
Can we talk about the flip side of this though a little bit, if you don't mind? Like there are, what's the right way to say this? When I was sitting on a trading desk, right, we automated a whole bunch of the trading that we did, and part of the reason for us doing it, well, there were two really. One was to save money, to save costs, but the second was also to be able to do way more business. Like one of my friends says that if you employ technology, it doesn't mean that you're going to get rid of more people. It just means those people are going to do way more of the same thing that they were doing. And I think I like to tell this story recently is when I joined the portfolio trading desk at Goldman Sachs, we were doing about $200 million of business every day, and it felt like a lot. But once we implemented sort of all these automated procedures, we were then doing about $4 billion a day. And it didn't feel any different to us, right? Because a whole bunch of stuff has been automated. But the compute power that we needed, the programming power that we needed, all of it just became way more expensive. Are we seeing any concerns around those types of compute costs and even some of the risks that are associated with it, maybe like in cybersecurity? Because, you know, the like data centers are eating up tons of energy, but to do all this AI stuff, you need massive data and data centers. What are the concerns around costs? And
Yeah. So you touched on three. By the way, great question. Thank you. And you touched on three sort of subtopics there. One is around the cost and the economics itself. The second is around the cybersecurity threats, and the third is around the the energy consumption and the impact thereof. Right. I'm sure there are others, but let's just sort of
those are big
delve
ones.
into that. I think right now folks are just there's this mad rush to try to figure out how to leverage the capabilities in ways that we've been talking about uh, so that, and there's a lot of experimentation going on. However, I think at some point in time, and hopefully in the not too distant future, we will start to get clarity on, okay, these are the use cases. Here's the here's sort of the opportunity, whether it be to save cost or increase revenue for that particular use case, and therefore, what is the right price point, if you will, or the cost that an organization is willing to bear to deploy these technologies. Because at some point, something has to pay for something, or something has to pay for everything, for that matter,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And I think while you and I as consumers may not care about going to a chatbot and asking questions, I think businesses are going to care an awful lot about how much they're spending for every token they're using, or every request they're making. And I'm already beginning to see those questions come up. In fact, I'll give you an example. Like, I was speaking with somebody, and they said, "Well, we are very careful already about how we make use of the GPUs or assets that they have access to, the tokens, and how in the end it all has to serve an ROI, right? If I'm using this technology to improve my conversion ratio, then it should improve enough that it pays for the technology." Do you know what I mean? Or they're trying to figure out how to make more optimal, efficient algorithms, how to use a variety of different chips so they can use the lowest cost chip for the highest return on investment. So I think businesses are thinking already along those lines. And in the end, like I said, uh, something's going to have to pay for everything, all of this. And so you can be pretty sure that they'll figure out a way where the cost to return equation will play for itself. Right now, having said that, there is this real fear that if we don't do it, then somebody else will do, and therefore we have to continue to make these investments and bear the costs that come with it. So that's sort of the first answer to your question around cost. The second one, so let's come to the the environmental cost, or the power consumption, if you will. I think right now, if I'm a large enterprise, I'm using somebody else's foundation model or somebody else's infrastructure to run my requests. It's not something that's hitting me directly.
Per
I'm
se.
paying for it,
Right.
albeit I'm
Right.
paying for it by way of, paying for the price of the tokens, etc. But I think there is a general consciousness and awareness about efficiency, uh, in the whole equation, whether it be from a cost standpoint or the environmental impact standpoint. And I think we do get. I mean, we've been getting those questions at Akamai about, making sure that we keep our customers and their commitments to being, environmentally efficient, or environmentally conscious. And I think those same questions are going to come again. I think in the long run we will get there. Uh, the cyber threat is a complex one.
Yeah, let's talk about this a
Yeah.
little bit because one of my friends actually runs a cybersecurity company. He's a former Green Beret, and every time I think about cybersecurity, the only reason why I mention the Green Beret stuff, he said, because it's like fighting a war on a different surface, right? So it's moved surfaces to a digital surface from a physical surface, and every time I think about cybersecurity, I think about him. But it is very complex. So maybe you could dig a little bit deeper into that one in particular, because the more data centers you have, the more energy you're using, the more connectivity we have, the more third party, all of these things, all this interconnectivity just creates more little points of places where you're at cyber risk. So it just keeps getting more and more complex, and particularly for a company like Akamai, which just has servers everywhere and connected to everything. I'm just curious what it looks like to you and what people are saying about
Yeah,
it.
no. So I think that's a big topic for in pretty much every conversation, right? Uh, let me actually take a step back. Like, if I were to tell you, what are the top three things that come up in every conversation at sort of a C level, and it's been consistent over the last few years. It's really been about, the advent of AI and how are they going to take advantage of it to get ahead, or the fear of how it might just eat them up. And we've spent a bunch of time today talking about that and ways in which it's playing out. The second is about cybersecurity. And cybersecurity on its own was a big topic, has been a big topic, but like you just said, uh, what AI can do to it just further complicates the whole scenario. And I think that's one of the biggest points of concern for cybersecurity professionals, all the way up to C levels and the board, if you will. And the third is, of course, is the skyrocketing cost of compute infrastructure. You know, what started as a promise of pay by the drink, and it's going to be always cost efficient, has now turned sort of upside down, and people are really thinking hard about how to optimize it. And again, AI is further exacerbating that pain, if you will. And so folks are really desperately trying to figure out like how to solve for all three. But coming to the point about cyber threats, look, we were already in an environment where the rate of attacks, the volume attacks has skyrocketed over the years. What AI does to it is it plays out two or three different ways. One is it's given a tool to the bad actors to come up with attack mechanisms, attack vectors faster, smarter than ever before. And so in what has always been an arms race, now you're competing with somebody who has access to these tools, and they also, these tools also are smart enough to come up with counterattack measures against sort of your defenses. So it's always a cat and mouse game that's going on. I think that's further sort of made the situation very complex. And this is even for your traditional applications. I'm not even talking about AI applications. Just whatever you might have in your infrastructure today. Then the second is the AI applications themselves that you're building.
I hadn't thought about it, but yeah.
You now have a whole new attack surface. These applications or agents especially are talking to other models. They're talking to other assets in your infrastructure. They may be talking to other external assets. And so how do you make sure you have you get the visibility into all of this, and how do you make sure that you have the mechanisms to ensure that the right assets are talking to the right endpoints and so on and so forth, that they are even real? Like, how do I even know that an agent is an agent?
So that's what I was just going to ask you. Like, are you worried about deepfakes and voice? Like, someone actually said to me, Michael, you have a really great voice. Why don't you train it and put it out there and sell it to people? And I'm like, I don't want to do that at all, because then people will pretend that it's me. Are people worried about that?
That's a whole different attack vector. And yes, that's going to be used a lot with like social engineering type of attacks and whatnot. I think that's going to be hard to solve for, much like a lot of today's social engineering attacks are hard to solve for. I think it's going to take a lot of training, awareness, and I don't know if there is like a simple tool that'll just filter out like a spam filter. But I think that's an area that's worth investigating. But even the agents or the chatbots or the applications you're designing right now are expanding your attack surface exponentially. And then there is you put out an agent, or you put out a chatbot, and it's giving answers, and it's something that's called prompt poisoning or prompt injection, right? You don't want it to give out responses that are not appropriate, that are
perhaps may spit out corporate secrets or say things that you don't want to, or things like that. And we've seen quite a few cases where a bot has given out answers that the company probably did not like. And so these are all these opportunities for cyber threats to emerge, but also for cyber professionals to sort of think about. And I think it's really made the landscape very complex for anybody in that role.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of prompt poisoning and things getting spit out, I just wrote down a note to myself. Like when I was at Goldman Sachs, they made us do media training, but can you give an AI voice bot media training? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you do that? Tell it not to answer questions, tell it to take the Fifth Amendment. Like, I don't know how that's going to work, but it's a real thing, no? Do you think companies are... So I want to start this actually in reverse before I ask you this question. It must have been in the 90s, a comedian. I actually know who the comedian was that said this, but it doesn't really matter. But she said, I'll buy a CD player if they tell me it's just going to be the last music device I ever need to buy. I know the sound is better, but if they're just going to come out with something new next year, why am I buying it now? So, right. So, and I always think about this when new technology comes out. It's like, is this just a new CD player? I don't think AI is. But my question is, because of all the things that we've been discussing already, are companies sitting back and thinking, do we need to redesign like all of our compute architecture, all of our data architecture? And we already talked about cyber. We can talk about that too, just so they can implement this stuff that they're doing in AI. And are they confident that Do you know what I mean? Because I remember, again, when I was at Morgan and Goldman, like when these, what were they called? Them blade servers came out, right? It was just the machine itself, no keyboard, no monitor and stuff. We implemented hundreds of them on Linux, and then we used them for 2 decades, right? Are we at a situation now where like that type of re-architecting of all these structures is going to happen as well? Because that just adds more cost, but I can't believe that the infrastructure that's in place right now at most big companies is going to be strong enough and powerful enough. Sure, they can shift stuff to the cloud, but that's probably just going to be like a 50-50 thing, right? Because again, and I don't want to spend more time talking about this, but the more you move stuff to the cloud, again, the more you increase your cyber risk surfaces as well. I'm just curious, are they re-architecturing all that stuff as well at the same time?
That's a great question. I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I was thinking as you were asking me, I think, so we just think out loud, right? I think what's happening right now is folks are finding isolated use cases or use cases within their existing processes, like I said, to either make a process more efficient or more optimal or what have you. And so it's not a complete departure from whatever exists today. And so it's probably an add-on, if you will, or an expansion of it. And so that's sort of what I see right now. Now, if I were to sort of figure out, okay, what's coming 5 years down the road, I don't know. Like maybe we look at the growth of cloud computing as an example. Folks slowly started moving their applications to the cloud, and eventually everything moved to the cloud, right? I mean, except maybe some crown jewels that they still like to keep in their private data centers. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what kind of applications and use cases come up, and and if they are truly end to end, then what will that new architecture and design look like? And I think that's really one area where we are sort of thinking about, like, what is the future of the web, so to speak?
Yeah, because right? I mean, to be fair, a company like yours is like kind of the web. It just is.
And so I think it's a bit of an extension of your question, but it all depends on how will we be interacting with the web as we know, the internet as we know, right? Are we still going to be filling out forms and clicking buttons and hit submit and all the rest of it?
And links and stuff, like how's it going to work? Yeah.
I don't know. Or are we just going to be talking to a little chat window and say, show me shirt size or my size, and it already knows my size, and it spits out those results. And so I don't know. I think depending upon how user behavior, how the form factor evolves, will probably drive and determine how the architectures evolve. And that's one area, if I may just say so, for Akamai, like we're squarely positioning ourselves for that world where we can provide everything from, you want to run inference on the edge all the way to the fabric on which everything runs, all the way back to your core computing and security capabilities, so that for that entire universe, you can think of a one-stop shop type of solution.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about the progression, and I'm just doing this off the top of my head, right? So if I get it wrong, please forgive me.
Yeah.
But like when we first started using computers at Morgan Stanley, it was like an IBM. Morgan Stanley was like an IBM XT. They weren't connected to each other. We weren't clicking on things. We were really just using Lotus 1, 2, 3 to make spreadsheeting and sort of accounting tasks a little bit more efficient. Then once we started connecting things, and once that happened, we were sending files all over the world. Then the web kind of came into its own, and we started clicking on things. And I feel like we've been clicking on things for the last like 25 years. And even though the phone has made that clicking more convenient, it's still the same activity, just without a mouse, but using your finger for it. And we can argue about whether glasses are going to be the next computing platform. But at some level, you're right. And you've just made me think about, like, what is going to be the next architecture? But at the back end, and I'm curious what you think about this. And let's just use glasses as an example, because it's something that people
Oh my God, that is such an exciting case. I was sitting at a dinner table next to somebody who was wearing these glasses.
Yeah.
It was a 1 hour conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
So just let me set it up, but like, let's use glasses as an example, because now there's no more clicking. And I know that's like some of the stuff that Apple was working on and Meta was working on, and to be fair, even Snap, right, was like using finger motions outside to simulate a mouse or, clicking on something. But I can't believe that people are going to walk around doing this all day. I just can't believe it, because it just seems like a weird thing for humans to do. But what I can see them doing, and I think stuff gets really weird, and I'll share a story with you in a second before you answer, but like I can see them talking. And I don't think a lot of people are going to do like hostage blinking, where they're blinking 3 times, because that's going to look weird too. But I can see them saying, hey, I'm in Tonglora, please tell me how to get to Siam Paragon. And then have the map pop up on either a screen or something that gets displayed in front of them. That I can see as something normal. But I remember, and I'll let you answer in a second, but I remember my first time when I was working at, I think it was at Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs in Hong Kong, I can't remember. And I saw a guy walking down the street who's dressed in a suit, didn't look like he was insane, just talking out loud. And I'm like, that dude must have lost his mind today. But what really happened was he had a Bluetooth headset in, which I'd never seen before, and he was like talking to his wife. So I can see people doing that. But like, maybe you can tell me what this conversation was like with the glasses you were talking about.
It was, I'm so funny you asked me, because I was thinking about it. Oh, that would be a fun topic to talk about. But
go for it.
You're right. Like, I think there is this whole, question about what will be the form factor. And I think what you talked about, sort of us talking to a device or to or speech as an input mechanism, is definitely one that I get excited about. I do that a lot, by the way, and you can imagine, like, instead of, I'll give an example, right? Every SaaS company today effectively will have to become an agentic AI company or what have you. Because, like, what do I do today, right? Like, every process is submit, click, submit, approve, this, that, enter data, da da da. Like, why can it not just be do this for me? And sure, it can take steps that a human can validate, but eventually that gets done instead of the human being having to do something. So I think, coming to your point now, the same thing is potentially likely to happen with speech, and I see a lot of people do that. In fact, that's one thing you see here a lot more in Asia. I don't know, it's socially, culturally just more acceptable. People are always like holding their phones and talking to them like this, right?
Yeah.
And I think you definitely see a lot of that. It's definitely, there may be a bit of a generational divide. I think you see the elderly do a lot more of that because they're not that comfortable typing. And so I think that's definitely one possibility. With glasses, it's just fascinating. So, there were this guy sitting next to me, and he was wearing these glasses, and, there was text in, I believe, Mandarin or Cantonese, and it would automatically translate that into English, or of course you have to set it up what language. So, like, I'm reading something through these glasses, but I don't have to take a picture and kind of do the translation that I do today, but it's translating it for me automatically. There's a camera, and to your point about form factor, instead of the pinching, I think there's the tapping. So you have the bridge or the frame or whatever, and then you can tap on it. Thankfully, the camera, whenever the camera would go on, there was a blue light that would come on to alert you that the camera was on. I think that there are social implications of that I won't get into. But I think it can. For the first time, I had this aha moment where, like, this can really be an interesting input mechanism as well as an output mechanism for us to interact with the world at large. And then, the question was, like, how much of the computing would sit on the device, as in the glasses, versus how much would have to sit remote. See, on a phone, you have a lot of computing power. So but then if it's paired with the phone, then okay, does the phone serve as the computing powerhouse or what have you? How much do you do on the edge? It opens up all kinds of questions, but you're right. I think there's a strong, there's a wide range of use cases where I can see glasses become really effective, and with AI, even more effective and exciting use case.
This excites me, and I'll tell you why. If you think about how you interact, like, with your family, your kids, or even your friends, all you're really doing is talking to them and looking at them. And if you need a little bit of an explanation, like, let's say you're talking to your son as an example, and you say, hey, can you go get me the newspaper or whatever? He's like, which one? You're like, that one. So it's just normal way you're reacting. So glasses that can understand and see things and then interact with them. I mean, to be fair, your brain is really just a gigantic AI engine at some level. Right, it's a gigantic compute engine, and the glasses just simulate that in a way that we haven't been able to do before. And I think as we get closer and closer to technology platforms that mirror the way we behave just normally without even thinking about it, right, and being expressive around it, in the same way, like, if you speak another language, right, you're not translating at all. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things that one of my language teachers told me. Never translate when you're listening to somebody speak another language. Just understand it. And that's how you know when you're getting closer to fluency. If someone says something to you like that, and that's what the glasses are doing as well, and then displaying it to you in a way where you can see it and understand it. To me, this is like one of the most exciting technology platforms that's ever been built. And I'm keen to actually talk to people that are actually building it at some of these big companies. I'll leave you with this, though. How do you think, because this is where you guys really excel, right? And you were talking about this, inference on the edge and all these other ways that compute happens. How do you think it impacts what you do as a company and changes the way you look at the way compute works and information gets disseminated? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think, and I've been thinking about it for some time, and Tom, our founder, who really sort of was the one who first came up with the solution for what was then called the worldwide wait, as in a reference to www, because we thought they thought the internet was going to be slow and whatnot. I think there's a similar conversation to be had right now, and I think we are lucky in that we're in a position that we can lean on what's our core DNA, which is to build distributed infrastructure at scale with stability and resilience that enterprise grade customers or enterprise grade companies demand. And I think that is squarely in sort of things we're good at. So we think we are better positioned than perhaps anybody else to be able to provide the computing infrastructure that is necessary, the security infrastructure that is necessary, and even the fabric, as in the interconnectivity between all these assets, to ensure a fast, secure, and reliable infrastructure for enterprises to build, deploy, run their AI applications, and for consumers to feel confident that their information, their data is secure and is being, and they're going to get the reliability and the resilience that will hopefully build trust and confidence in these technologies.
Right. I'm excited about what the future is going to bring. I'm going to let you go. Parimal Pandya, SVP and Managing Director, Asia Pacific at Akamai Technologies. I cannot thank you enough for doing this. I honestly hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I hope this is not the last time we do this. Thank you again.
I very much enjoyed this, and we can make it a seasonal affair every
6 months when you get back from your trips.